To the second segment of this show this morning. The topic is African American History Month and Women's History Month. And quite recently, during our first segment, we had a conversation with Miss Alana McLaughlin. And of course, in doing so, we sort of laid the foundation for the topic today, and that is African American history and women's history. And we have with us during the second segment, Dr. Gloria Pillow, who will give us some additional information about African American History Month as well as Women's History Month, February and March of 2011. Yeah, and then we'll be able. Why don't you, Dr. Pillow, give us a few minutes of information in reference to your background, your education, and some of the things that really led you to come to us with this great book, Mother Love in Shades of Black and White. And we want to talk about that book as soon as we have an opportunity to get some background information from you.
Thank you, Dr. Haney. I'd first like to say that Nashville has been one of my two homes since I was born. I came here as a child, age 6. I was born in Atlanta, and my father's work brought us to Nashville. I am a proud graduate of Cameron High School here in Nashville, and then pursued BA in French and secondary education at Clark College back in Atlanta. After teaching, my first stint in graduate school was at the University of Minnesota. That was right after college. That was in pursuit of a master's in French. I worked for the Minneapolis public school system for 7 years. For 3 years, I directed a project on institutional racism, desegregation, and for 9 years after that, I was director of the United Negro College Fund office in Minneapolis. Then at a rather advanced age, I decided that I really needed to follow my dream, and that was to return to school to study literature, specifically African American literature. All literature interests me, but that is my main area of specialization.
Very good.
And I did so at the University of Chicago. Received my master's and PhD, and taught at Michigan State University for 5 years. A medical situation required that I take a medical leave, and I returned to Atlanta, where my parents had retired, lived with them for 6 years, and then happily married a high school friend, and that's what brought me back to Nashville 5 years ago, and this is when I was able to work on my book.
You know, we talk about your book, Mother Love in Shades of Black and White.
In Shades of Black.
I understand that you've got 6 segments in which you would like to share some information with us.
Yes. Dealing
with historically African American females for the most part. And I think that that's quite interesting. What I'd like for you to do over the next part of this segment, as well as the final segment, is to give us sort of a statement in reference to some of these women and some of the impacts that they had and some of the things that they were able to do in their lives, and then we'll be able to sort of summarize that book for you.
I'll start at the end, if that makes sense, and that's because the 6th chapter has to do with Toni Morrison's Beloved. The mother in Toni Morrison's Beloved is an incredible character based on a true story. It's a slave narrative. I hesitate to call it fiction because it tells the story of so many slave mothers and so many enslaved individuals, and for that matter, so many slave holders who did not realize, some did and some didn't, how cruel and insane the system, the culture was, and how insane it made all of its inhabitants, black and white. We talk about entitlement today, but when you think you're entitled for someone to fan you because a little fly is buzzing around while you're having your mint julep, that's very serious. And when you think you're entitled to take one's children and sell them, again, this is dementia as far as I'm concerned. So Mother Love begins and ends with a slave narrative. One is an autobiography, that's by Harriet Jacobs in 1851, and it ends with Toni Morrison's Beloved. But I was beginning with Beloved because that's the book that stirred my interest and started my research path.
And created a passion for you in
very
reference to it.
much
I
so.
can determine that.
When I think of my growing up years in Nashville, in a completely segregated environment, and I think of what the parents and the teachers were able to instill in us, while the larger society was saying you're second-class citizens, you're inferior, you're not intelligent, you can't go to a public park, even though it's public, you're not allowed, and here's your little for coloreds only water fountain. I think back to the beginning of that insanity, and that was, of course, the institution of slavery. This mother, Dr. Haney, killed her child. She killed her not because she was crazy, not because she was a bad mother.
Okay.
She killed her because she could not stand for her children to live in such a prohibitive environment. And I wanted to search very carefully what made up this woman's psyche.
Very good.
And I dealt with psychoanalytic theory. I deal with that in each chapter, which is interesting because psychoanalytic theory has a shameful history with regard to people of color as well as women. But on the plus side, it offers incredible insights into our behavior, why we do what we do. So if I look at internal issues with regard to psychoanalytic theory, it explains a lot. If I dismiss some of the externals, then I'm on surer ground in terms of looking into why did this woman do this? Why? How could she have been a good mother and yet hurt her child to this extent? And from that novel, I chose several others at different points in time so that the reader and I could gauge how difficult the terrain was for a mother to negotiate the racial and the gendered territory that she was navigating.
And these are the mothers that you've identified in terms of your novel, I mean in terms of your historical work.
Yes.
And so we want to talk about them as soon as we come back from this second commercial break.
Right.
And we'll be back with our audience after the second commercial break. Thank you now.